Yeah, one of the things I would say is in order for FANOS to be effective, and you alluded to this, everybody gets to choose it. Everybody gets their yes and everybody gets their no. If it feels forced or imposed, you cannot force intimacy. You cannot force vulnerability. That the beginning place of vulnerability and intimacy are options and choices. And so for the couples that are out there where maybe he's willing to do it at this point and she's not, you get to be in that space. Or maybe it's each night is we're going to check and see if I'm willing to do it. But you do get to be where you are. And what I'm hearing from you is there can be a value if the wife isn't willing to engage FANOS, if the husband is willing, just for him to be able to check in about what's going on.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Evert, your co-host, here again today with our host, Dr. Greg Miller. Great to have you, Greg, as always.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Thank you for leading the ship today again. And we had promised you on our last podcast that we would beg, borrow, and steal the time of Susie and Russ Susie to join us again, as we're going to continue the conversation that we started on the last podcast, talking about FANOS.
Okay. And for those of you that are joining and maybe didn't hear the last one, FANOS is a check-in that Mark and Deb came up with, and we began to talk about it in the last podcast. It's FANOS. Each word stands for something. F is for feelings, A is for affirmation, N is for needs, O is for ownership, S is for sobriety or spirituality, depending on where you are in the recovery journey. And as we begin this podcast, we thought it would be great to start with an example of what a FANOS sounded like. And so Russ has volunteered to be our model and demonstrate what FANOS would sound like if someone were to do it.
Sure. Hey, Susie, this was our time to do FANOS, during the podcast. Would it be okay if I went ahead and started?
Go ahead.
All right. So right now I'm feeling a little bit anxious and happy. And I would affirm you for the way that you love our children and grandchildren so well. I need to be able to get back in time to attend my art class tonight. I would own that I've been forgetful lately, and I've been forgetting to put things away like they should be put away. I'm sober, and I've been reading through 1 Peter lately, and I'm really kind of getting a lot out of grace, the way grace is described there, which includes surrender, which really ties into my recovery.
Okay, great. And so that is a beautiful example of what FANOS would sound like. Again, it's not intended to begin a conversation. You notice that Susie didn't interrupt and ask questions or to get clarity about something. It's just a way that you can share with your spouse what is going on for you. And part of it is based upon your ability to be self-aware. And it's kind of that starting with self-awareness and then choosing to be transparent and sharing it with your spouse. Susie, as you were listening to that, any thoughts or awareness?
My thoughts about that are that it's a gift because most of what is said there, we don't know unless it's shared with us. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that sharing parts of ourselves that aren't obvious, aren't readily there, really is a connector. And I think back to our premarital counseling where it was drilled into us, communicate, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody told us how. And so this would be a really good how-to. Right. Or maybe we just didn't listen to the how. I don't remember. It was a while ago.
Yeah, but what I would say is I wouldn't be surprised if there was no how. Just this idea that we're supposed to share, but it's kind of like we were told to speak French, but we were given no French lessons. So it makes sense, even if we're trying to learn French, we don't necessarily learn it well, because there are some ways to learn a language more effectively. And FANOS is kind of a foundational way to learn how to grow in your intimacy and connection with your spouse. Now, one thing that probably we do talk about, this is for connection, this is for sharing, this is for vulnerability. But for some couples, they are not quite there yet. And one of the things that we said in our last podcast is that to the level of safety a person is experiencing, there's a direct correlation to the willingness to be vulnerable. And so if it's early in the recovery, there's still a lot of pain and chaos, and yet you're wanting to create some form of connection, this could be the way to do it.
Right.
But there's also an understanding that I may be limited in my vulnerability simply because at this point there doesn't seem to be a lot of safety in the relationship.
Yeah, and one of the other, maybe you said trust building too, but before there was really a lot of safety and vulnerability, just the fact that Russ showed up and was consistent and didn't forget, or he was willing, he was there to initiate, was a trust builder. And I think that's a really, really important piece of
Yeah. I run into people all the time where we'll introduce them to FANOS, they'll come back and we'll say, how'd it go? And it ended up that one person initiated 90% of the time. And that's kind of trust reducing, because the person that's initiating all the time isn't believing that the other person really wants to do it. So, by showing up and taking turns initiating, you're really building trust in each other that it's important.
What would you say, Susie, are some of the things that a wife looks for to be in place in order to even consider the possibility of doing FANOS?
In place. Well, I needed just to have him demonstrate that he was going to show up and share with me.
Okay.
I don't know that there was a lot in place at first. I have to think about that. But the dance that we had was, I talked a lot. That's how I took that direction to communicate.
Right.
And Russ is a quieter guy. And so just the fact that the willingness that he showed me to say, I am going to show up and I am going to share in these new ways with you, it was really meaningful to me. One of the things that was in place was choice. There were, I don't know, quite a few times where I didn't have that much to say. And it wasn't that I was not wanting to show up, but I wasn't always able.
Right.
And so that idea that he's showing up even when I'm not, or I'm partially showing up, I'm saying a couple of the letters. I guess that was in place, and that was really important.
What about an awareness of his commitment to recovery? Like, did you have, before you were willing to maybe even be engaging, you had some sort of sense that he was committed to his recovery, and this was a part of that process, so you were willing to participate at that point?
Yeah, the initiating, for sure.
Yeah. I know that I work with some guys, and one of the questions we get is, well, I want to do FANOS, but my spouse doesn't want to do FANOS. She doesn't want to share with me. Is it okay if I share my part, and if she's willing to listen, she listens, but there's no expectation that it would be reciprocal? Would you say that if a couple finds themselves in that situation, either at the beginning or even after they've started, maybe there's a night where the wife says, I don't want to share tonight, but the husband still shares, is there a value in the person who's willing to share being able to share in that space, or do both people need to be open to it in order for it to be effective?
No, I think that for sure one person can share. And especially what you're describing early on, Russ has known about his addiction for a long time. I've recently found out back in that day, and I'm in a way different place than he's in. I'm not in a self-righteous place where I'm better than you. I don't have to participate, but I'm just in a wounded place.
Right.
And so it was really meaningful that he would do that.
Yeah. Well, and I also think there's a space early on where the wife may really want it, the relationship to work out, and doesn't have a lot of confidence that it can.
Correct.
And so it's really difficult to invest in something that you're not sure is going to make it. And so sometimes it's just a process of time and watching the husband be committed to his recovery and then experiencing him differently that begins to open the spouse up. You know, one of the things I would say is in order for FANOS to be effective, and you alluded to this, everybody gets to choose it. Everybody gets their yes and everybody gets their no. If it feels forced or imposed, you cannot force intimacy. You cannot force vulnerability. That the beginning place of vulnerability and intimacy are options and choices. And so for the couples that are out there where maybe he's willing to do it at this point and she's not, you get to be in that space. Or maybe it's each night is we're going to check and see if I'm willing to do it. But you do get to be where you are. And what I'm hearing from you is there can be a value if the wife isn't willing to engage FANOS, if the husband is willing, just for him to be able to check in about what's going on.
Well, I think it can speak to motivation too, right?
Right.
If the motivation for the guy to show up is to say, this is the new guy I want to be. I've never shared feelings before. I'm not good at owning things. I don't express needs, but I want to. And so I'm going to show up and I'm going to offer this. And if you are willing to accept it, that's what I'm doing, because that's the person I want to be, not because I want a reaction out of you, not because I need you to pat me on the head,
Right.
Not for you to acknowledge that what a great guy I am. None of those things were happening early on. The body language was not like I demonstrated. It was much quieter and sometimes a little bit protective, self-protective.
Well, and one of the things I would say is it's important for a husband to honor his spouse's yes and no. Mm-hmm. And there may be a time where she says, I don't want to hear your FANOS tonight. Right. And instead of pushing and demanding it or kind of manipulating her into it, just to release it and say, okay, I honor your no, I'm not going to share tonight. Right. And then if you need to share it with someone, share it with somebody in your community. Mm-hmm. But again, if it's to be trust building, it's not just what we're doing, it's how we're doing it. Mm-hmm. And for those of you that are familiar with our use of the wise man and the survivor man and the little boy, there's a very different energy when the survivor man is doing FANOS versus when the wise man is doing FANOS. Yeah. And the survivor man FANOS is about performing. It is about pickpocketing approval. It is about demonstrating how well your recovery is going or how much you want to invest in the relationship. So I do think there's a piece here where it's not just that I'm doing FANOS, it's am I grounded as a wise man coming to my wife to offer this rather than have some other agenda behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's just a simple tool that has so many implications to it. I think we wanted to make sure we talked about the struggle part.
Well, we've got a few more letters.
Oh, we're not.
We're on these.
Is that all the farther we are?
Yeah.
Oh man,
I'm
we might
keeping
need
track.
about 5 episodes.
I am too.
Okay.
So on our last podcast, we talked about the F, the feelings, the A, the affirmation, and the complexity of those. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk this time about NOS and the complexity of those. So let's talk about needs. What makes it so complex for people to share their needs?
Good question. When we've started off and we've said, try FANOS and they come back the next time, needs are almost always the thing that come up as challenging. And I think having needs, having awareness of our needs has become too attached to being needy. Mm-hmm. None of us want to be that needy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of us maybe have been given messages that needs are you're selfish, you're too much, you're all kinds of things for having needs. And so it's gotten shut down for whatever reason. Any of us who have little kids in our lives know that they are professionals at demonstrating they have a need.
Because it's just a natural expression of who they are. The language that we
Right.
use here is everyone is needful.
Needful.
We don't talk about needy because, like you said, it has this imagery of being weak or pathetic. But everybody is needful. Everybody has needs. And children haven't been taught to disconnect from their needs.
Correct.
I also think the language is challenging. I get the question sometimes, what's the difference between a need and a desire?
Right.
And I would say that a need is something that is foundational for life. And that can be life in my physical life, like I need sleep, I need to eat, I need rest or whatever. But it can also be that administrative need. I often say that a family is a small business, and the small business needs certain administrative tasks in order for it to function. And so there may be a need for me to go pick up the cleaning or go to the grocery store, or I got to pick up the grandkids or whatever that need may be. But it's based with this idea that in order for our family to function well, or for me to be able to be productive, I need to do this, or it really is a basic foundational need of my life. What I would say about a desire is something that enhances our life. Desires are the things that give us the abundant life. Both are very, very important. What we're talking about here is getting clearer about what my needs are. And if I say, I need for you to, that's not a need. That's me imposing something on the other person. It's I need, and then I identify whatever it is.
So needs are not demands.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Or announcements. This is what. Yes, this is what has to happen, kind of thing.
I think one way to kind of lead into it, it's not the only way, but I need help with. And that is because I think of it as I need to receive something, as opposed to I need to do something, which is a should. And we hear that all the time. I need to be getting more sleep. I need to be reading my Bible more. Well, do you need help with that? Maybe you do. Maybe I need help so that I can have time to sleep. Maybe I need you to watch the kids between this particular time period so I can have my quiet time. I need help with that. And so that to me is the beginning of kind of figuring out how to ask for something that you need that is legitimate. Like you say, it's everybody needs help.
So we're practicing hearing that from our spouse and not necessarily meeting the need.
Right.
Not to be punishing, but sometimes we can, sometimes we can't.
And that's part of the power of community. Is if I've established a system where my spouse is the only one that can meet my needs, I've set everybody up to fail. Or if I have the belief that it's only beneficial or meaningful if my spouse meets my needs, I've set everybody up to fail. So I can express a need, and I can even know that in this moment my spouse can't meet that need and doesn't want to meet that need. And I also have a community of men, or if I'm the spouse, a community of women that can help me meet that need. You talked about sleep. Well, maybe what I need around sleep is some accountability. I have a tendency to stay up too late, either working or watching TV or whatever I do. I need that call, or I need to reach out to my guys and say, hey, it's 10 o'clock. I've made a commitment to start going to bed around 10. I want you to know I'm doing it. And it's amazing how I need some accountability around this, and asking for that help can be a significant part of understanding our needs.
That's a good example. I remember I showed up one time in group and I had a need to see this movie that Susie would not want to see. And so my need that night was I don't want to go alone. I want to feel community in this. And so is there anybody in the group that would go to the movie with me tonight? That was my very practical need. And I think 3 or 4 guys went together. So sometimes it's just really practical like that, right? I just need to be part of a community in some way, and you're asking to be help with that.
What's complicated is, using Mark and Deb's, 7 desires. There are times when it can be both a desire and it can be a need. I think a great example of that is safety. What is foundational to our existence is safety. If we're not safe, then we can't really live. However, it's also one of the desires that we have is just to be safe. And so if someone says, I need to be safe, then the next thing could be, and this is what I'm going to do to begin to create safety for myself. It's something that I'm doing, not I'm putting on you. I need to be safe, therefore you need to do this. It's I need to create safety for myself, and this is how I'm going to do it. And I do think there's a lot of complexity around this. There can be, there are some of the words that are charged, and this one can be charged. It can be charged because I'm not familiar with this. I didn't grow up in a home where people valued my needs or affirmed my needs. I was taught, negative things about needs. It can also be charged if there's a history in the relationship where needs were weaponized and used against each other to point out their inadequacies or their limitations. And if you meeting my needs was connected to love, if you love me, you would do this. This can easily go south. And that's why that we get better and better at really naming the need. And as a person listening, I don't necessarily respond. That's one of the hardest things, is because if historically we've used our needs and kind of weaponize them in the relationship, it's going to be very challenging for me just to sit there and listen to it. And yet that is my responsibility right now in FANOS.
Yeah. That makes me think of the anti-need, like when you were put in an adult role in some ways in your house growing up, that you were given the role of meeting everybody else's needs.
Well, as you were talking, Greg, I was thinking about there's needs that I have that I meet myself, and I'm becoming more aware of that. There's also needs that I have of others. And I think we want a healthy mix of the two, because if I'm only focused on what I need and I'll take care of that myself, there's no connection or relationship or vulnerability in that. On the other hand, if my needs are all things I always need of others, I'm not stepping up to my adult self probably as much as I should be.
Right.
To meet some of that.
And what I would say is be aware of your patterns of the past and swing the pendulum the other way. A lot of the men that come through our workshops, one of the ways that we would define them is they're independent. They have this message, I'm going to do it myself, and if I can't do it, it doesn't need to get done. And we're really challenging them towards this interdependence where they're relying more on community, because the reality is there are certain needs that I cannot meet by myself. And so if I just say, well, if I can't meet it, I'm not going to do it, there's a whole part of life that I'm going to be missing out on. And then for that person that maybe they grew up being taught and trained that they're inadequate, they're not enough, they're fragile, they need other people to take care of them. Maybe they work more on those independent things and begin to have confidence in their ability to be self-reliant and that they can take care of themselves. But the reality is, at the end of the day, we're seeking a balance where we have both.
Yeah.
And during FANOS, you're not going to have that discussion.
Right. No. This is why it's so tempting to expand it into a big conversation. So the next one is ownership. And so I want to just quickly get to ownership because I also want to spend enough time on sobriety. But ownership is just taking responsibility for my life. I can own I did this. It can involve an apology. I'm sorry that I reacted. I can own I overreacted in that situation. Or I can own that I've been silent and withdrawn. But it comes from some sort of self-awareness where I'm hurting my relationships and I want to own my contribution to the chaos or the hurt or whatever's going on. And this, for many of us, ownership is a brand new thing and it's something that we're going to have to learn. Okay, so finally we've gotten to the S, and I just want to say for those of you that get the Faithful and True newsletter, be sure and pay attention to the September newsletter that just came out, because there was an article that Susie wrote, because we wanted to create clarity around what S is and what S isn't. And so for us, S is about sobriety and it's about spirituality. And what we would say is with the sobriety, it's not a check-in, it's a confirmation. We never use FANOS to communicate to our spouse that we're not sober. Because then it becomes all about the final S and you don't hear anything until you get the confirmation. So the idea is, S is I'm just confirming that I am still sober. If I'm not sober, we're going to have that conversation apart from FANOS. But we're also getting information that S is being used in a new way. So what if you talk a little bit about the challenges of that?
It's kind of good news that FANOS is so popular out there that people that haven't ever come through our doors know about FANOS. And one of the things that we're hearing is that S is being used as a place for the husband to share the struggles, the sexual struggles that he had that day. And that is, to us, a real detour on the original intent of FANOS being a trust builder. It's about confirmation, like you're saying, yes, I'm sober, and here's what I'm doing. And instead, it becomes a place where now the wife is being provided with details, day-to-day details about his struggles or his challenges that are really his to take to his safe community.
Right.
It's not that he's hiding anything from her, but it's not helpful for her to have this constant flow of information about what his struggles are. What we believe, it's helpful for her to say, here's my plan. I'm working my plan. I'm taking things to my group, and I'm sober.
Right. I think that this is really challenging because there's a belief out there that information creates safety. And if I don't feel safe, then what that means is I don't have enough information. And so what we see sometimes is there can be an over-focus on details and information in an attempt to create safety. And one of the things I've heard wives say is that at one point they got too much information, and instead of the information created safety, it actually created greater chaos and anxiety and fear. And so it's not that this information isn't important, it's about how we share it and with whom we share it. But absolutely, if a guy is having struggles and challenges, he needs to be connecting regularly with his community. And one of the things I say to the men is just because you want your drug doesn't mean you're failing. And in fact, one of the things that can be true is the harder I'm working the recovery and the more transparent I'm becoming, actually the more that I want my drug. Because I'm feeling stuff that I used to medicate. Kind of the image that I use is if I have knee surgery and they give me pain medication and I take all my pain medication and I'm no longer taking pain medication, I start feeling the pain, and then what I want is my old pain medication. Well, the same thing can be true in recovery. So just because I'm struggling doesn't mean my recovery isn't working. It may actually be an indication that I am moving towards the pain. I am talking about things I've never talked about before. I'm allowing myself to experience things that I haven't experienced historically. And if a wife doesn't have that context, if she's hearing about struggles, what she's left with is, oh my gosh, he's not doing well, when in reality, he may be doing well. And if he's not doing well, he needs to be sharing that with the community. And he also needs to be including his wife in what is going on for him. Instead of talking about my struggle with, the addiction, I can be talking about, I'm really feeling anxious today, or I felt sad today, or I'm really angry today, or I'm feeling confused today. Those are the things that the FANOS was created in order to create that sense of vulnerability and openness and safety and trust. So FANOS is all about sharing, and there may be times when it is needed to have a conversation about struggles. We would say that probably doesn't need to be done alone. Maybe that is a conversation a couple has with a therapist, and it's not going to be a part of FANOS, because then what happens is I start to dread FANOS, both her, what she's going to hear, him, what he's going to say.
Why would we want to do that?
Yes, and then FANOS is going to fall by the wayside.
For a wife to be able to hear, I got really stressed out today at work, and I had to make 3 phone calls to my group guys before I reached someone, and now I can tell you I'm doing well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a trust builder,
Right.
and it's part of the in the addiction. That stress at work might have led to acting out, but that's the work he's doing, and he's sharing with her how his program is working.
Right. And I will say, I know we're out of time, that for the wife
Yes, we
who
are.
wants the information, she's not failing. She has been left in the dark. She is seeking some clarity and some understanding and some information about her own life and what is going on. What we would say is it's important that a tool like FANOS isn't used for those hard conversations. If those hard conversations need to happen,
They need to happen.
They need to happen, and they need to happen away from this.
Mm-hmm.
I often say FANOS is not intended to be a conversation starter. That we do FANOS, we check in, and then if additional conversations need to happen, we set the time aside for that.
Thank you for joining us again today on the Faithful and True podcast on our series on FANOS. This was FANOS Part 2 and featured our special guests, Susie and Russ Susie from the team here at Faithful and True, along with our usual host, Dr. Greg Miller. We hope that this podcast has been beneficial to you, and we count it among the many podcasts that we have available on our website at faithfulandtrue.com. We invite you to visit our website, where you'll find also not only 550 plus podcasts, but you'll also find all of the information and online registration for our 3-day intensive workshops. We host the Men's Journey Workshop every month, and then about 3 to 4 times a year, we host the Women's Journey Workshop and the Couples. That we have 2 forms of the Couples Journey Workshops, and we invite you to explore the details about that. Until then, we'd like to thank you. We hope that this coming week for you will be a week that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.